Hi, I'm Kath from Veg Patch Kitchen Cookery School, and today I want to show you my all-time favourite gadget in my kitchen. So this is my Komo Fidibus XL tabletop flour mill. There's lots of models of flour mills out there that you can look at and investigate. I went for this one. I've had it about 5 years now. So at the time when I bought this was the one most suited to my needs. It looks beautiful, it's got a good strong motor in there. It's the one down in the range from the commercial, so it's top of the range for the home baker. And it's highly adjustable, so I can go from the coarsest flour setting, which is great for things like bulgur wheat, to the finest flour setting, which is great for things like pastry. So I just want to show you how this works. Okay, so I've got here some grain. Now I get my grain from a local farmer that grows brilliant range of bread wheats and all grown organically. So what that does mean is that I do have to just have a look at it and make sure there's not too many weed seeds in there. To be honest, if there's weed seeds, I think that's a bonus because it means that it is definitely grown organically, and that's, you know, really good. And he cleans it really well, so there's very few weed seeds in there, but it's always good just to check through, make sure that you don't have any, make sure there's no stones or anything like that in there too, as you don't want to damage the mill. So this particular grain is hold fast, and we're going to put it through the mill, and I'm going to show you how I mill my grain. Okay, so you put the mill in here, which is the hopper, and then it feeds through to 2 ceramic millstones inside here, and then the whole wheat flour comes out of this spout. Okay, and you turn the hopper to adjust from coarse on this side to fine on this side. And then there's a black button here which turns it on and off. Okay, so I always start with the black dot at the very coarsest setting that I can get it on. Okay, so that's moving the millstones further apart, giving them a greater space between them. And the black dot's now round here. Okay, I could take it further if I wanted to, but I'd sort of take it to about there. It's beyond these scales really, or only just an approximation. I'm just taking them further apart at this point. I've got 300 grams of wheat grains in here. It's going to end up with 300 grams of whole wheat flour. And then you can choose whether or not you sieve it to remove most of the bran. So we're going to put it in the hopper. Just check anything that needs to be removed, little weed seeds, bits of chaff, very few. This is a lovely clean grain in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mill it at the coarsest setting, and that just breaks the grain down into something that could be used for bulgur wheat. Okay, and then I'm going to run it through again. Now the reason I do this is what I call double milling, is that if you run it from whole wheat on the finest setting, the friction that has to be applied to each bit of grain to get that down into that really fine flour that you want is a lot more than if you break that whole grain down into a smaller piece and then feed it through again. Okay, so what you end up with is a bit more of a finer flour, and I also find that it doesn't raise the temperature of the flour too much. So when I've done this double milling, I haven't ever really gone above 30 degrees centigrade with the temperature of my flour, and I do like to test it with a temperature probe. Okay, now there are lots of arguments out there as to whether or not the heat caused by milling affects the nutritional value of the flour, and I think it's pretty much undecided. but I'm not taking my chances. I want it to be milled as coolly as possible as I can possibly manage. So I use my temperature probe, monitor it. If it gets to above 30 degrees centigrade, what I do is I stop the mill and I just leave it to cool for 30 minutes and I'll mill again. But doing this double milling method tends to reduce the friction between those two stones. Okay, so I'm going to mill it first of all at the coarsest setting, making sure my bowl's underneath the spout to catch it. It is noisy, so bear with me. I wonder if you could hear the change in the sound when the grain started to run out there. So as the grain started to empty from between the two stones, the sound changed. And what you want to do is make sure you're watching the mill. Don't walk away and leave it to mill. You want to turn that off as soon as you empty the grain out, because you don't want the millstones to be milling against each other with no grain in there. Okay, so that's at its coarse setting now. It's some of it is cracked in half, some of it is in smaller pieces, some of it is actually a flour. Okay, so it's a very variable grind that you've got there, but this will make it much easier now to run through on the fine setting. If I want to make a bulgur wheat salad with this, what I do is I sieve out the flour. We're using a coarse sieve, and then I soak that cracked wheat to make a beautiful, delicious bulgur wheat salad, and it's really good. So what I'm going to do now is feed that, sorry, I'll tell you the temperature before I do that. So this is now milled at 20 degrees centigrade, so it's very low temperature, okay? In fact, it's 20 degrees centigrade in this room, so it might even be, you know, below that, it's at room temperature. Okay, so the milling hasn't increased the temperature of the grain at all. If you're concerned that your mill perhaps doesn't mill as efficiently as this one, it doesn't have such a powerful motor, and you are concerned about the temperature getting too high, what you can do is freeze your grain beforehand, so you're feeding in frozen grain, and that obviously reduces the heat coming out the eventual flour. Okay, so I'm going to leave the lid off this time because when grain is in there, it runs fairly evenly through the hopper down into the stones, and you don't need to watch it, but you do need to listen out for when the tone changes. But when it's a mix of cracked grain and flour, it very often just feeds from the front, from the top here, leaving the rest at the side. So you do have to just be here just to funnel it down into between the millstones. So what I'm going to do is run the machine and then spin the hopper, because what I never want to do is spin the hopper to the finest settings when it's not got grain in between there and it's running grain, because what I don't want to do is get those stones turned against each other when there's no grain in there. So I set it to running, turn it to the finest setting that I want, and then I turn it back off, put the already run through flour back in to just run through again, because some of it's still coarse from when I'm spinning the hopper. Okay, so I've got some very fine flour on the top, and I've got the broken grain, so they're going back in to go through again. And I've really got it now here, where's the black dot? Here on the mill, and actually that's the spot that I've marked in pencil. When I do my milling tests, I like to run it through on exactly the same setting each time I grind flour to the fine setting. So I've marked a little pencil mark on my mill so that when I do that, I know I'm milling all the flour to the same setting. Okay, so off we go again. I'm going to run through the whole of the 300 grams. I'm going to make sure that the temperature doesn't rise too much. Okay, so that's run through. Beautifully fine flour. I can still feel some bran bits, which is to be expected with a whole meal after all. And the temperature probe is showing 27 degrees centigrade. Okay, so that's how I double mill wheat through my Komo. The temperature that I've chosen of 30 degrees being my maximum is really arbitrary. Okay, that was just something that I picked out of the air. I decided that I didn't want my flour to go above 30 degrees, and that's based, when I say arbitrary, it's based on my milling experiments with lots of flour, lots of grains over the past 5 years. And doing this double milling method and doing about a kilogram of grain each time, I've noticed that actually very few of them go over 30 degrees. They might go up to perhaps 32 if they're a very hard grain. But that's my red line. Your red line might be different, okay? But it gets a lot hotter than that in larger commercial mills. So it's not something that I'm saying if it goes over 30 you've lost nutritional value. All I'm saying is just bear in mind that the nutritional value might diminish if your flour gets too hot, okay? So unless you've bought a mill that is intended for continuous running, and they are available, so if that's what you want to do, make sure you buy one that will run continuously without you needing to turn it off to cool it down. Then you need to keep an eye on it. And this one isn't designed for continuous milling. If I'm milling a lot of flour, I run a kilogram through and I leave it to cool until I use it again. Okay, so that's my advice for you.